Hello all, James here. Now, to give you an idea of just how much a sick child can throw a spanner into the works, I meant to record this video on Tuesday. So, anyway, that was 3 days ago. Better late than never, that's if you agree with me or enjoy this video, I suppose. But let's get to it. There's been a lot of controversy, or at least a bit of complaining, at least online, in regards to the AEW WrestleDream main event, the pay-per-view main events between Jon Moxley and Darby Allin, the I Quit match. Now, I actually have my issues with how the main event was put together, but it's actually for different reasons, and I guess the vast majority of people displaying outrage, whether real or fake, and there is an awful lot of fake outrage out there on social media as well. I truly believe with AEW especially, there's a lot more piling on by people who have not actually watched what they're complaining about, or, you know, they've just read a recap or a still image. But that being said, the big issue online was regarding the fish tank spot, right? Toward the end of the match. Now, Jon Moxley, after mostly bludgeoning Darby Allin for around 15-20 minutes, the Death Riders, who are all out in force, they all ganged up on Darby, and then, while he was incapacitated, they brought out a fish tank into the middle of the ring, then poured water in it. And then Moxley dunked Darby's head into said fish tank several times in order to, I guess, make him quit or drown him, which I'm not quite sure. Now, there's good bits of psychology to the whole build-up of this. Stevie Richards came up with this, actually, yesterday, is that he liked the fact that Moxley, and that show will be out later today as well, Moxley splashed water in Darby's face to wake him up first, before then dunking him and, I guess, trying to force him to quit. That being said, also, I'm sure, you know, dunking Darby's head into a cold fish tank of water would have woke him up anyway, but who knows. The bad is that if Darby drowns, then I guess it's a no contest, so, you know, sort of counterintuitive. Anyway, or counterproductive at least. Now, this was the bit that drew the most ire, but for me, I wasn't, you know, offended by it at all, to be perfectly honest. Now, I actually thought the spot itself was really safe, because they waited a long time to give Darby a rest, which is imperative when the adrenaline's flowing, the blood is pumping, and you can't hold your breath for anywhere near as long as you might be able to if you know, pulse rate is low, etc., and, you know, thousands of people aren't watching you live. That being said, I did think it was in very bad taste, of course, but, you know, at least it wasn't Big Japan where they put live piranha in there, and then the piranha didn't actually bite the guy. But anyway, I don't want to give Jon Moxley or Darby Allin any more ideas, but there were another couple of spots within the match that people took umbrage with, let's say. Number one, the taser spot, or maybe number two if you count the fish tank. They were using, we think, a real taser, but they didn't really build it up that much, and there was hardly any contact between the taser and Darby Allin's skin, and then they just kind of moved on from that, which I just thought was a complete waste of a taser spot, which is an extreme spot, but it was kind of just a throwaway segment and a bunch of other almost throwaway segments at that point. Now, on the very rare occasion tasers have been used in professional wrestling, at least in the upper leagues, real or fake, it generally is the high spot of the bout, and once again, it was just kind of a bit of a throwaway thing, and then they moved on. Once again, didn't bother me. Now, the hanging spots. Now, Darby Allin wrapped the AEW flag around, from Mount Everest, in fact, around Moxley's neck, and then threw him over the top rope. And then Moxley sold the hanging over the ropes very hard and very well indeed, actually. Once again, I've no problem with this. It's pro wrestling, that kind of thing. They've been doing this for decades, from weirdly... well, not weirdly, I'll give you the Don Morocco and Ricky Steamboat, I remember very well, from like 85 or something. And weirdly, the Repo Man and the British Bulldog, they've also done it, in amongst loads of other people. Moxley loves doing it. He sells it really, really great as well. I think he does a really good job. Now, here's the one that got me. The skewers under the fingernails. This is the one I never want to see this in wrestling or anywhere under any circumstances ever. Even though there was, I'm sure, some holding back and he wasn't hammering the skewer in to actually peel off his nails, I think. Anyway, well, not the hammer anyway. For my taste, that's just way too gruesome for a mainstream pro wrestling company, or just anywhere. I don't want to see it. That's just not my bag at all. I didn't like the skewers on top of the head. I don't like staples. I mean, staples visually are nowhere as bad as the skewers kind of thing, but the skewers thing really wigs me out. I don't like it. I don't think it's got any place in wrestling. That's my line in the sand, basically. And when I watched it back a second and third time while I was writing this, I still had to forward through that spot. I know they're holding back to an extent, but they're still doing it, and it just grosses me out massively. more than anything else, I think that's because no one's going to quit from that, especially when it was only 5 minutes into the match, which is a point I'm going to make further on in this video as well. But I think most people, that'll be a huge turn-off, or they'll just turn off. If they bought the pay-per-view, they probably won't, and they'll just look away. But if they haven't, and they've seen it after the fact, they just won't want to watch it. And I actually think that's the kind of thing that will put people off AEW watching pay-per-views, because it seems that every pay-per-view has something like this in the main event, or one of the advertised matches. But once again, that's going to be a point I'll get to soon. Really, it's now feeling like, with everything and then everything else included as well in the match that I didn't, really mention, it really feels like Moxley with the with the tasers and the skewers, and like every viscerally unnerving stunt that Moxley is trying to do, kind of just like it's almost ripped off of the Jackass franchise. That's the kind of stuff that made me look away from the screen when it was happening in Jackass, and it's almost like he's stealing from that kind of franchise, or Dirty Sanchez, or Dude, whatever the other one, I can't remember. I'm half expecting Jon Moxley for his next main event pay-per-view to just drink a glass of horse jizz, because why not at this point? You're taking so many other things. Now, for the death match or hardcore spots, and especially the fish tank spot, former AEW employee Sarah Stock complained about this online. Now, she would go on to undermine her initial point massively with some seriously ill-advised follow-up tweets that I'm not going to get into because it's not the point. But let's take the initial message, and then Amanda Huber, Brody Lee's widow, I'm going to take her response as well, and then sort of break those down as well. So this is from Sarah Stock. You know who should stop this? Mothers. Now she's talking about the fish tank spot in particular. With their remote control. This is worse than the plastic bag over the head. Kids are going to end up dead trying this stuff at home. And then Amanda Huber wrote back, want to know what my kids, because I have kids, were doing at midnight last night? Sleeping. Want to know why? Because they're kids. My wrestling-loving kids. Want to know what they weren't watching? A match between two performers who are known for taking things to an extreme. Want to know why? Because it's my responsibility as a parent to know what they're consuming. It's cool though. I'll let them watch some old TNA stuff, and then they can learn to choke each other with a belt, since that's cool, because Chex Notes tits look great. Anyway, this is in response to Sarah Stock choking somebody out with a belt on the TNA show. Both have points, but ultimately parents need to parent here. If we're going to be talking about, protecting kids, I guess. Ultimately, kids are incredibly stupid, and if they're not, having nightmares from this kind of thing at a certain age, they may well try and copy it. Because, look, kids will kill themselves over anything, given half a chance. I mean, planking, Tide Pods, a bunch of other TikTok crazes that I stopped reading about years ago that I haven't kept up with. But do I think kids are going to rush out and buy a fish tank and copy that spot? No. Do I want my 11-year-old niece watching AEW ever, if there's a chance this kind of content might be broadcast? Absolutely not. And this is something, once again, I forgot to mention this earlier, but at least this was on pay-per-view, but they're doing way too much of the stupid stuff on television as well, and I think that's another line in the sand kind of thing. It's one thing where you kind of expect some more extreme stuff happening on pay-per-view, but, with the the nails in the board, there's one on Collision as well. I think it was Christopher Daniels' last match. But there's loads of stuff like this happening on AEW television broadcast free as well that I think they shouldn't, for sponsors' sake, for, actually enticing families to watch. Because once again, Tony Khan said, hey, we're pricing for families. They're sure not booking for families. I'll tell you that for nothing as well. But once again, that's kind of not my point again on this. That being said, going to what I was saying earlier, kids do imitate stupid things, that's true, they see on wrestling television. But also, they imitate stupid things they see on the internet. And if they don't get the pay-per-view, by crikey, I'm sure a heck of a lot of 10-year-old kids and 12-year-old kids have got phones, or at least access to phones, or access to the internet, access to social media, and they will see those videos. So, just because they're not watching it on pay-per-view doesn't mean they won't watch it after the fact, like the majority of people do. Now, as for the skewered spots... Oh, actually, I've got one more thing to say. This was about Sarah Stock's point and saying, well, yes, kids imitate stupid things. But in wrestling, it seems, maybe not 25 years ago when the WWF at the time was running a lot of those really great adverts saying, don't try this at home. Well, obviously, the kids these days, or the kids 15 years ago or 20 years ago, they learnt from that. They didn't try it at home. But what they did do was that they put it in their head and then started trying it 15 years later when they got into the wrestling business and did the same stupid spots or built onto them, but at least it's on pay-per-view, and at least they're getting paid for it. Now, aside from the skewers spots, which I really could have done without, as I said before, what I find most offensive about all this was the structure of, and even the booking of, said match. Now, let's go to the beginning. The pre-tape hype video didn't actually explain, really, why Jon Moxley and Darby Allin hate each other. And it's been so long since they started feuding, and then it was on again and off again, and Mount Everest climbs where he was gone for months on end because he was training or climbing or recovering or whatever. And in between the first serious interactions, which I think was 2024, and now, I honestly have no memory of what started the feud between the two. None at all. I don't know what the major disagreement is. Is it just the Death Riders a year ago were trying to take over the company, and now they're not trying to take over the company because they sort of just forgot about that whole thing, and then the Young Bucks aren't associated with them anymore, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's just one giant storyline that just seems to have been forgotten, really. I've forgotten why Darby also was feuding with Jon Moxley, but here's the thing. All I got from the pre-tape vignette or the hype video package is that Jon Moxley and Darby Allin don't like each other. Moxley's going to make Darby quit, and Darby says he won't quit. I think the reasoning needed more focus there, especially because there wasn't a title on the line. Because then at least, well, they're fighting for the title. Anyway, Moxley gets the heat on Darby almost right away. And actually kind of kills the crowd for like the first 10, 12, 14 minutes, apart from some oohing, like the taser thing or the skewers, etc. And I sort of thought a good portion of the match was quite quiet until they started doing the fish tank and the Claudio throwing Darby from the ring onto the table, that kind of thing. The first half was kind of muted for what it was. It was also at the end of the show, and all AEW pay-per-views are really long. WWE's, I was going to say WWE's are as well, but what they've done is shortened them and then given you half the amount of matches. But anyway, keep that in mind, all of that I thought that the match was kind of structured really weirdly and not optimally. Dean Malenko and Chris Hero were the producers of the match, and I don't think they laid it out right in that sense. If it's going to be a big old grudge match, you kind of want to see him brawl for a good few minutes, back and forth. Darby Allin has been, for 90% of this feud, shown to be the total chump of this, and that he basically has no chance to beat Jon Moxley. I just kind of think they were trying to get too much sympathy on Darby too early. And it would have been better if there was way more back and forth, and then the Death Riders get involved, or Marina Shafir distracts him, or whatever it is, at the 10-minute mark, and then settles down, and then into the 20-minute mark we have the big comeback. Now, that also leads me to my next point. Darby Allin has no friends, at least for the first 20 minutes of a match where he's getting drowned and his fingernails getting pulled out and tasered and all that kind of thing. But there's Marina Shafir especially, but all the Death Riders interfere liberally. Fish tanks, distractions, all that kind of thing. To the point that, he has to be Darby has to have cold water splashed in his face. It's like the Simpsons thing, stop, he's already dead kind of thing. Then, after 20 minutes, old man Billy Goat's gruff Sting turns up. And I say that, we all love Sting, obviously. And I kind of like the fact that he's really old, but still got a really long goatee, but still takes the time to paint it as well. But anyway, after 20 minutes of mostly a one-sided beating, that's when Sting decides to turn up and actually help his best pal Darby out. And I was just like, was his bus late? Sting's bus late? Did he misguess how much face paint he needed? Because, the beard and everything like that, it takes up a lot. I bet it soaks up a lot of face paint as well. Maybe he had to nip to the shops and get a sort of top-up, but look, eventually he showed up kind of thing. But that's the kind of thing that bugs me, is that you've got friends, but they don't turn up until, you could have died. Then, after the hangings and the tables and the steel stair bumps, which I didn't even mention, fish tanks and glass and skewers and all that kind of thing, because they actually, Sting and then Darby actually smashed the fish tank in the ring, so they were dealing with glass as well. None of that actually ended up with the finish of Jon Moxley quitting. It was a wrestling move, which always gets me. Why'd you go through all these things? Why don't you just wrestle? Because apparently that's the only thing that works. But anyway, it was the Scorpion Deathlock, applied by a man half of Jon Moxley's size, and then Moxley quit really quickly, within 3 seconds it felt like. Or we can only presume he quit because there was no microphone in an I Quit match. There wasn't even a tap out at the end. We just kind of have to take the referee's word for it that Jon Moxley quit. He might have said I quit in the camera, in the microphone picked up, but I don't know. But the fact is that this is an I quit match. It has been a staple for decades that the ref has a microphone. It builds the drama throughout the match. They've been doing it once again for decades, 90s at least, if not the 80s. Yet for some reason AEW didn't bother with this, and I don't know why. I kind of think it took some of the drama out of the match, especially would have given the audience something to cheer when they were in that first half semi-lull. Quit, and then Darby says, I'll never quit, and then whatever he says with it, and then that'll get a cheer from the crowd, build it up a bit more. But anyway, here's what bugs me the most. It's not that this was an I quit match. At least the main event was, anyway. But it was a hardcore match, or no rules, or street fight, or whatever you want to call this kind of match. A match where weapons are legal. Guess what? This happens so often in AEW pay-per-views. Like every single pay-per-view basically has at least one hardcore match where they're doing some really horrific stuff to each other. I mean, how many Swerve Strickland Adam Page matches have we gone through in the last year and a half of and everything else in between bags on heads, and it's not even just the men, it's the women, like Steph Statlander and Willow Nightingale last year. I mean, in fact, actually, I think that was the pay-per-view where they had a hardcore Chicago street fight. Then Bryan Danielson had a plastic bag put over his head and he was suffocated. And then it went to Swerve Strickland and Adam Page for an all-time, once again, a bloodletting kind of thing going on. I don't know if that was the one where he got the needle in his cheek, but here's the thing. Is that, fair enough, WWE has long since made, for example, tables redundant. Not only having them appear on basically every show, but also having Slim Jim sponsor said tables. So now they are a complete joke and you just cannot take them seriously. But you're not at least building to a main event program with a table spot. Somewhere in the show, it's for the audience, everyone cheers. Slim Jim sells a couple more sticks of compressed meat. Whatever, we've got Pepperami, it's basically the same thing. Anyway, AEW does so many of these intense build-up, extreme rules style matches. It's just that they're kind of just completely redundant at that point. And then when matches of this type become completely redundant, you then start playing the game of, can you top this? And that's how you end up getting a hypodermic needle through the cheek, or doing something ridiculous off the top of a cage, or doing skewers on the top of your head, or trying to suffocate someone with a plastic bag, or drowning them in a fish tank, or anything else of that ilk. It does get to a point where the spots are either simply too dangerous to perform, or they are, in this case, too gruesome, where at least there's no serious danger of death or something, but it's like turn the TV off kind of stuff. For me, anyway. This is kind of where I think an AEW needs a Triple H or a Vince McMahon. I'm not saying either of those. I'm saying a head honcho where the buck stops and they've got an eye on the overarching health of the company and the overarching themes of every show and whatever, instead of this scattershot last second booking. Once again, this is a Tony Khan trope, is that maybe not for the pay-per-views quite as much, although a lot of pay-per-views have suffered this, but for the TVs especially, there's practically no build or nothing announced in advance for what's going to be on said Dynamite, for example. Unless, it might be announced, maybe one thing's announced 2 days beforehand, then the rest of the stuff seems to be announced, if it is announced, on social media the day of, kind of thing. But anyway, that's, once again, going off on a tangent. This is all becoming too redundant. It's on every single pay-per-view. AEW doing, 10 pay-per-views? They might even be doing 12 pay-per-views, actually, of a calendar year. And once again, it's becoming too redundant. All these extreme, basically death matches that are main eventing or semi-main eventing every pay-per-view. Now, and here's another thing. Death matches in AEW, once again, to use the word redundant, they're becoming the new ladder matches. And do you remember when ladder matches was something that happened every 2 years or 18 months or whatever it might be, and they were super special? And now, between WWE and AEW, at one point a year or two ago, they were happening every week, it seemed, and NXT as well, which is WWE. Anyway, to sort of crystallise this, I'm absolutely not a Jon Moxley hater. I know people will be, commenting on Plumber Moxley, blah, 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 that kind of thing. I think, ultimately, Moxley's problem is he came from CZW, and he obviously really enjoys the bloodletting and the extreme stuff to the point I actually think it's dragging him down as a performer. Now, he's got really good size. He's in great shape. He's intense. He's got a good look. I think he's a good AEW champion, when he actually wears the belt and defends it. And is somebody who can be taken seriously as a main event player. And dare I say, I'd say the same in WWE. He could be taken seriously on a Punk level kind of thing. You would, and I know he was a former world champion in WWE, but at that point, I thought he was way too early. Anyway, I think all the gimmicks distract and diminish his other qualities, and unfortunately I don't see anything changing, because I think it's all because of him, and he just wants to do all this stuff. And I think it's really counterproductive for Jon Moxley to do all these things, or to even lean into all these deathmatch tropes and hardcore matches constantly. I honestly think he would be better off if he didn't use a single weapon for 6 months and just wrestled and got his character over, and the bulldog choke and that kind of thing, because I actually think he's really good. That's my opinion. I know a lot of people don't like Jon Moxley, but whatever. I also see Darby as somebody who, because he is undersized, has to resort more to the deathmatch thing. And look, I've got no problem with him doing it. To be honest, I've got no problem with Moxley doing it anyway. If either of them, but we're talking about Darby, wants to kill himself for our entertainment, hey, I'm all for it. Once again, I'm from the Jackass generation, you know what I mean? I just don't believe also he's main event material, because I don't find him believable. He's half of Moxley's size. He cannot be more than 160 pounds, and that's being generous. Moxley, once again, I think, is more than good enough to be putting him over, but all I see between the two is a total mismatch anyway. But anyway, I'm just talking about the entire main event. Look, I don't think it was a bad main event kind of thing. I'm just saying it's just completely redundant. A couple of spots I could have just, the skewer spot, that's it, I could have just completely done without. At least this was the crescendo, a culmination. But once again, I didn't think the match was laid out that great either. But the last 5 minutes with Sting coming out was all great, and then Darby finally gets his revenge on Jon Moxley. And then I think on Dynamite this past Wednesday, Darby did like a 1 minute promo, barely mentioned it, and they didn't really sort of build anything else up for him after the fact either. So once again, it's all a booking situation, and I always find it really really annoying, because once again, I always say that I hang out with Dutch, and I talk to Dutch Mantel constantly. I've worked with, or at least been friendly with, to the point exchange phone numbers, text back and forth, asking questions, that kind of thing. Most living great bookers of the era, and they all kind of say the same thing. And that's kind of the thing that sort of bugs me. I see these things that may not bug other people, but they bug me. And, that's my opinion, and that's that. So once again, if the fish tank thing upset you, fair enough. But for me, it's the over-reliance on the hardcore matches and spots in AEW in general that is just annoying me. And ultimately, I think it's lazy booking. And the Darby Allin, Jon Moxley main event kind of, I'm not saying proves my point, but I think it goes more the way to providing evidence that all these hardcore matches are just too redundant. And once again, no more skewer spots, no more nails in the back from a suplex spot. I think I speak for most people where we say we can kind of do without it, especially on free TV. But anyway, tell me what you think in the comments. Hey, you completely disagree with me if you want, why not? Please comment anyway, either way. Please like, please subscribe, all that kind of jazz. I'll see you for the next video.